Let's talk defence right now. My next guest is General Sir Richard Barrons. I'm very proud to say he's joining us, former head of the UK Joint Forces Command. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. So we've been hearing a lot about defence in the last few days in terms of policies like nuclear deterrent and how we're going to defend ourselves. Bearing in mind we're told we're in a pre-war, not a post-war era now. Are you convinced, as a former military man, that all the parties who have a chance of being in government next time round are going to keep this country safe and can defend our realm?
So I think there's a one common point between certainly the two major parties is that they have both recognized that we do live in this really much more difficult and uncertain world where there are genuine existential potential risks to the UK's security and prosperity and values in a way that there really hasn't been up to about 2020, maybe even 2014. Where I think both major parties are stuck is they're both saying to us that this world that we're dealing with is really dangerous and we can't afford to ignore it. But then they're both saying, but right now we can't afford to do anything about it. And I don't think that's a tenable position for the life of the coming parliament.
What did you make of this announcement from Keir Starmer on triple lock on the nuclear deterrent? But then only a few hours later, the deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, said she wants to rid the world of nuclear weapons, said she'd not changed her mind about nuclear weapons, and she supported multilateral disarmament, which she said was really important in the long term. She, of course, voted back in 2016 not to renew Trident, actually did, as did a large number actually of members of the Labour shadow cabinet. What do you make of that? Well, I'm not a dispute as such, but different point of view.
So I don't think those positions are irreconcilable. I think most sane people would prefer to live in a world where we didn't have nuclear weapons, but we do have nuclear weapons, and you can't just disinvent them,
Yeah.
and you certainly can't do it unilaterally. So unless the whole world decides to park nuclear weapons forever, which just isn't going to happen, we are living in a world where the UK, like many other countries, has decided it must have an independent nuclear deterrent because if you draw the lessons many other countries are drawing from what's going on in Ukraine and many other places, a nuclear deterrent is one of the strategic tools that keeps a country fundamentally safe and secure.
Well, indeed. Do you agree? I can't use the exact quote because of we're on family radio here, Sir Richard. But the former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, he was giving evidence in a committee earlier this week, but he was also speaking to the Sun's Never Mind the Ballots interviews, and he said that Labour's policy, their triple lock pledge for nuclear weapons, wasn't a triple lock; it was triple something else rhyming with lock, and said they were trying to rewrite history and that Keir Starmer is fundamentally dishonest in their promises on national security. Do you agree?
So perhaps there's an election on, and people are saying
No,
many
I
things
noticed.
for effect. I mean, I think it's clear from both major parties that they adhere to the idea that the UK has an independent nuclear deterrent and it needs it. And I would argue that in the world we're now seeing unfolding, not only are more countries going to have nuclear weapons, almost bizarrely, we seem to live in a world where some countries, and I really mean Russia here, talk about using small tactical nuclear weapons, which the UK doesn't have, and that is just, I think, an indicator that in the world we live in, nuclear weapons are going to be a feature, and both parties seem to be acknowledging that.
Yeah, indeed. But of course, we all know that conventional weapons is what is more likely to be used. And as we see, even when we turned away from thinking we would have no trench warfare, well, that's what we've been seeing in Ukraine. Are you concerned at these latest figures that show that thousands more people left the military than joined up last year, according to official figures? More than 15,000 full-time personnel quit the armed forces in the past year, according to the MOD. Just over 11,000 signed up. We're supposed to be expanding our forces, expanding our spending from 2.2% of GDP to 2.5% of GDP over the coming years under whether it's Labour or Tories in government. But we certainly should be seeing surely more troops on the ground, available to be on the ground as we are dealing with Putin and what's going on in the Middle East, possibly China and elsewhere. I mean, when you saw those figures, when you heard those figures, what was your reaction?
Well, those figures aren't a surprise. It is a fact the armed forces are losing more people than they're gaining, and this is because they don't all feel valued. Defense has a cash crisis. The money spent on training and equipment and support and housing isn't enough to make people feel that they are as valued as much as they think their service should be valued. And I would absolutely agree with that. But neither party really wants to talk about what's going to have to happen to conventional defense in this election. But everyone can see that we've returned to a new era with NATO, and in the jargon, it's resetting deterrence by denial against Russia. That's going to be more expensive, and it's going to cause us to reset conventional forces. And the heart of this conundrum is our armed forces are in the state they're in as a result of about 30 years of the post-Cold War era where we didn't really feel threatened, and now we are threatened and we're going to have to revitalize them. And there's a bill coming, and that bill is going to be bigger than either party wants
Yeah.
to contemplate, but they will have to
And
contemplate it.
that's the thing. Voters expect the defence of the realm. They look in horror if it's not an issue. If we haven't got the fighting forces, which we clearly do not have sufficient numbers of and equipment right now, that's very, very clear. However, it's very, very big expense, and it's a long-term benefit. And politicians vying for our votes at elections like to go for short-term fixes. Military is rarely one of those.
That's absolutely right. And until the military becomes the only thing between the country and disaster. And the
Yeah.
fact is, with the stagnant economy and the tax and borrowing burden as high as it is, the conversation we're going to need to have in the next parliament is how do you make adjustments in efficiency in things like health and welfare, which is where most of our money goes, in order to find more money for defence, because we are going to have to do that.
We are indeed. Really good to be joined by you. Thank you so much, General Sir Richard Barrons, former head of the UK Joint Forces Command. Thank you for that.